What's something that occurred on a first date that made you choose not to go on a second one? I matched with a girl on Tinder and we decided to meet for drinks downtown and take a walk around a popular park. But last minute, she messaged me to meet her at her place instead of the restaurant, which was just a 3-minute walk from my subway stop. Fine, I thought, even though I'd have to walk 20 minutes in the opposite direction. But I'm a nice guy, so whatever. When I got to her place, she invited me in because she needed to finish getting ready. I sat on the edge of her bed while she did her thing, and all I could hear through the walls was people having sex. She casually mentioned it was her roommate and her new boyfriend. Then, she asked if I wanted to compete with them to make her roommate jealous. I politely declined, telling her I was starving and just wanted to go eat. I didn't mention that I wasn't expecting anything to happen and didn't have protection. So, we walked to the restaurant, and during dinner, she went off about all her exes and how they ruined her relationships. Whatever, I thought, who hasn't complained about their ex at some point? The dinner actually went pretty well, mainly because I had a few drinks to relax and the restaurant had a chill vibe. Afterward, she said she was tired and asked me to walk her home. No problem. I already had a feeling nothing was going to come of it, so I was looking forward to heading home early. When we got back to her place, the roommate was in the kitchen getting drinks. She straight up called her A___ and yelled at her to stop effing her ex so loudly while I was on a date. Turns out, the guy she was loudly having sex with earlier was the ex of the girl I was with. The roommate then joked that I was next, and the two of them started screaming at each other. I told her I was going outside for a smoke, so they could hash it out. The second the door closed behind me, I booked it, basically jogging 3 blocks to the subway to get the hell out of there. I texted her when I got home, saying I had fun getting to know her, but wasn't interested since we didn't have much in common. She didn't respond. A week later, she sent me a nude and asked me to come over. I never thought I'd hear from her again, so I blocked her. The worst part? The restaurant we went to had an amazing Mexican place that she said she frequented, so I never went back out of fear of running into her again. LOL. Story 2. Here are a few of my favorite ones, from the most recent to the oldest. There was the girl who told me she didn't connect with animals and didn't want any pets. Meanwhile, my profile clearly had pictures of my 2 cats and dog. Not sure why she swiped right on me, or didn't notice that when she asked what I was doing, and I said I was out walking the dog on our usual hour-long loop around the neighborhood. Then there was the girl with a profile that showed a physically fit, attractive woman my age. But when she arrived, she was 15 years older and about 150 pounds heavier. I decided to stay because the texting conversation went well, but within 5 minutes, she hit me with a series of racist slurs and opinions. I only stuck around to hear the end of her rant, so I could laugh about it with my friends later. The things she said were so unhinged and not based in reality, and by the end of the date, she had talked nonstop for 45 minutes about everything from her job to her exes to her trips to Disney World. She seemed upset that I didn't talk much, but when you don't take a breath for 45 minutes, how was I supposed to get a word in? And then there was the girl who spent the whole date talking about Taylor Swift. She found a way to bring her up in every conversation, even when it didn't make sense. I figured she didn't want to date me. She wanted to date Taylor Swift. At the time, I'd heard exactly one Taylor Swift song and had no idea she was anything more than a one-hit wonder. I had to get out of there, fast. Story 3. I went on a date with a guy, and as we were heading down a set of stairs at a popular hotel, he physically moved me from one side to the other. I had been walking down one set of stairs when he just picked me up and moved me to the other side. Later, while we were talking, a group of people tried to squeeze into the bar, and instead of pointing it out to me, he just grabbed me and moved me again. Major red flag. Story 4. One time, I sat down to eat with a guy who started by blowing his nose into a linen napkin and then proudly looked at it, asking, "Wow, what you got there, Sparky? Can I see?" Then he ordered a triple scotch from the hostess and became belligerent when it wasn't delivered within minutes. While we were waiting, he sniffed his pits and commented on his beast resistance. But the real highlight? He read the entire menu aloud to me, annotating which items would give him the most gas and ranking them based on the quality. Honestly, I was so confused but also fascinated. I just sat there, grabbed some popcorn, and took notes. My friends and I still laugh about this fool to this day. Story 5. We agreed to meet at a beach bar, and when I stepped out of my car, he basically ambushed me in the parking lot. His dating profile said he was 5'11", but in reality, he was shorter than me. First red flag. If he lied about something so obvious, what else was he lying about? He also had an NRA sticker on his car, which he hadn't mentioned. I was already uncomfortable, but I felt too awkward to just turn around and leave. We got seated, ordered drinks, and then he started interrogating me. When I say interrogation, I mean it. Your dating profile said you work in animal care. So, what specifically do you do in the animal care field? At the time, I worked at a dog daycare. How many dogs are under your supervision? Only dogs, no other species? How satisfied are you with this line of work? Do you plan to continue this as a career? Do you plan to go to grad school? I answered with vague responses. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. That set him off. So, you don't have any drive or ambition then? You feel you'd be competing with other students and they'd have an advantage over you? It just kept going, question after question. Do you like living here? What drew you to this place? How is this town different from where you went to college? When I said, it's full of yuppies and old people, whereas Gainesville is a college town, he asked, so when you say yuppie, what do you mean by that? And when you say college town, what specifically do you mean by that? The questions kept coming. Have you ever been to Jacksonville or Tallahassee? What did you do there? Are you an only child? What do your parents do? Are they conservative? Do you consider yourself a conservative person? Do you have any religious affiliation? How would you describe the bar band? What adjectives would you use to describe this type of music? It was a never-ending stream. Do you live in an apartment? Do you have any roommates? Are you training your dog to be a guard dog and attack people? No, I just said he's docile. He even asked how long I've lived in Florida, what other states I visited, and what countries I've been to. I answered each one with as little detail as possible, but he didn't stop. After nearly an hour of this, he finally asked, "What's wrong? Why are you being so distant?" I wanted to be honest and tell him he was being an irritating dish-a-bag, but I just didn't have the courage to say it. Finally, he dropped the baby card. Come on, I'm just trying to get to know you, baby, and have a good time. That was the trigger. I pretended to go to the bathroom and ditched him.
Jak groß.
Good for you for hanging on as long as you did, but man, once he busted out the baby card, it was time to head for the hills. Story 6. This girl and I had an amazing time mini-golfing and then grabbing drinks at the bar. It wasn't until the end when she casually mentioned that she homeschooled her 4 kids, 3 of whom had different dads. I'm all for living your life the way you see fit, but I didn't want to be the 4th father to the 5th kid. She really should have mentioned that in the messaging leading up to our date. I didn't want to be dishonest and say, I don't want kids, so I knew it wouldn't be a good match for me. Story 7. I met this Mexican girl at a local Dunkin' Donuts for our first date. We ordered and sat down, and we hadn't even started talking before her whole family walked in and got in line to order, all while looking over and giggling. After about a minute, she got up, said something to them, and then all her older male family members walked over to the table and introduced themselves to me. They weren't rude or threatening, but it was just weird. When I say whole family, I mean her mother, father, 2 aunts, an uncle, both grandparents, and maybe 4 little kids. I never spoke to her again. Story 8. After dinner at a nice restaurant, I thought our relationship would progress. We dated for a few years, lived together, got married, and were expecting our first kid. Then, I found out she had been cheating on me. She demanded to know why I would do that, and I just laughed. Our waitress, who had been standing at the staff station for the entire thing, looked horrified. I excused myself to the bathroom, and the waitress followed me because she knew I wanted to get out of there. I paid with a nice tip and bailed. We met at the restaurant, so I knew she wouldn't be stranded. I'm not an a-hole. Story 9. We met for dinner, and somehow we got on the topic of pineapple on pizza. He was very enthusiastic in saying that anyone who likes pineapple on pizza is a heathen and should be sea from the earth. I laughed, thinking it was a joke, and said, well, I like pineapple on pizza. It was apparently not a joke, and the rest of the dinner was painfully awkward and quiet. We clearly both wanted to leave as soon as possible. We never spoke to each other again. Sometimes I wonder if he became a pineapple on pizza-hating serial killer. Nearly avoided death. Story 10. We met at a bar in our mid to late 20s. He was funny, smart, handsome, and had a good career. He asked me to an NFL game the following weekend. I was so excited because I love sports, and this particular game day was hot as hell in my southern city. After the game, we went to his place nearby. I kicked off my shoes, and we chilled in the cold AC after hours in the heat. After about 15 minutes, he said, "I'll be right back," and headed into his bedroom. Next thing I know, I hear a whirring, buzzing sound. I looked up and saw him walking shirtless into the living room with a vibrating dildo in his hand, saying, "I just want to make you feel good, baby." His creepy voice and the look on his face were enough to make my blood run cold. I didn't know what to do, but I had already subconsciously started shoving my foot into my tennis shoe. I crammed on the other one, grabbed my purse, and bolted for the door. I was so glad it was still daylight outside. I never saw or spoke to him again. Story 11. He told me he had a violence fetish, and then he tried to get me to watch real snuff films. He even talked about how illegal they were as some kind of twisted foreplay. Earlier, he had asked if anyone knew where I was. Being stupid and horny, I assumed he was just making sure I was safe. So, I reassured him I'd texted the address to my roommate. Now, I realize he definitely would have hurt me if no one knew I was at his apartment. Story 12. I met him at a barcade for our first date. He was already drunk. He lied about his age, weight, and height. The pictures on his dating profile were from 4 years ago. He also lied about having kids, saying I didn't have to worry about meeting them, because he wasn't involved in their lives at all. Then he suggested we rent a hotel, so he could stretch that out. I told him no, and he called me something dirty. Story 13. Within 5 minutes of sitting down to meet me, he decided to comment, "You have huge, huge tits," and mostly talked to my chest while I tried to finish my food and get the hell out of there. I really liked the food, but right after the date, he sent me an unsolicited pic of him naked, cupping his junk. Then he demanded I return the favor, because he sent one.
Blocked.
Story 14. This wasn't the first date, but the third time we met up. She invited me to a small party at her place. At some point, her young daughter came out from the kids' room with a fairly mundane question. I don't remember the exact question, but it was something basic like, "Can I have something to drink?" She screamed in the kid's face and backhanded her. Nobody did a thing. There were probably 15 adults in a room, including me, but I knew none of them besides her. I decided the best move was to just leave. Story 15. We had known each other our whole lives, same daycare, same school, same homeroom teachers. There was definitely chemistry. After dinner, he drove me home and we kissed. We pulled away quickly, both staring at each other, pale, a little nauseous, and horrified. We nearly said in unison, no, and then we both laughed hysterically. It felt like I kissed my brother if I had won. I imagine that's what it would have been like.
Gross and just wrong.
The chemistry was of very close siblings. Our mistake. LOL. Yes, we stay close friends. Story 16. They tried to steal the tip as I left, after harassing the waitstaff before we even ordered, then screaming at them that they demanded free chocolate milk, something not even on the menu. Their dinner was already a reason for no second date. The only reason I sat through the meal was that they were driving me. We were coming back from me helping them move a bunch of furniture, so they were my ride. Story 17. He started discussing marriage on our first date. I barely knew him, but I knew he had just come out of a broken engagement. I had a trip to Aruba booked, which would have been the honeymoon, and he was talking about how great it would be to give me a ring there. I barely knew him. He was nice enough, but I was in college and wasn't even thinking about marriage. He was either 3 or 4 years older than me. Not a bad person, but we were at different points in life. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. One of the worst things you can do is succumb to peer pressure and commit to something you're not ready for. Maybe it's something you want down the road, but you know in your heart when it's time, and when it's not. Kudos to the poster for avoiding it, even though the dude seemed pretty cool. Story 18. My profile clearly stated I wasn't interested in smokers or drug abuse, since I have strong allergies to smoke and I'm in a field where I'm frequently drug tested. I matched with a girl who had all her photos edited to make her look tall and lean, but she was only about 52 and not that slim. No big deal, I like all types, but it threw me off. We went to a restaurant where she explained she was late because she'd recently totaled her car.
Turns out it was a DUI.
She was a bartender, as if that made sense. She told bartender stories, including almost getting arrested for carrying a hunting knife while working and how she once crashed into a fire hydrant on her way home. She then told me she lived with her crazy ex and that they shared a bedroom. While we were in the middle of the restaurant, she pulled out a hunting knife and silently placed it on the table. Then, she pulled out a weed pen and went to town on it. She said she hoped I made exceptions and blew a smoke ring into my face, which she thought was sexy as hell. At the end of the date, she put me in a headlock to force a kiss on me, probably the only way she could reach me. Then, she walked off into the sunset with a lit cigarette in her hand. I've not made any of this up. I talked to her on Instagram a few years ago, and she had transitioned into a polyamorous relationship with 2 other people. That was absolutely the funniest story of the day so far. I don't know why, but just the way the poster delivered everything so nonchalantly, being put into a headlock, getting a smoke ring blown in their face, and knowing they didn't like drugs and were triggered by them, was just hilarious. Story 19. My profile says religion none. We matched, chatted, and decided to have dinner. We sat down, and when the food came, she asked, "Do you mind if I pray before we eat?" I was like, sure, go ahead, but internally I was thinking, is this chick trying to convert me? She proceeded to pray loudly, loud enough for me to hear her praying to God about the date we were having, above the music. I just started laughing, internally, but still crying inside. I tried to keep the conversation normal and asked, "As you know, I'm not religious, and it's pretty clear that's important to you. Have you ever tried to date someone at your church?" She replied, "No. None of the men there are of quality." I cursed the godless universe for matching me with this, __. I still paid for everything and pretended like nothing was weird. Now I know. Next time something like this happens, I'll just put $20 down, get up, and leave. Story 20. I was forced by my mother to go on a date with a childhood friend. It was more like someone I grew up with but didn't talk to much. He was the son of my mother's friend. My mom wanted me to try dating him because he was a doctor and a good Christian man, according to her. What she didn't tell me was that this man was pretty much insane. One of the first things he tells me is that women get period cramps because of their boobs. The bigger their boobs are, the more painful the cramps are. So, he wanted a girl with small boobs, so he wouldn't have to deal with her whining. I'm a curvy woman, and I wanted to leave so badly. Luckily, I wasn't forced on another date with this man. He said some other weird stuff that made me question how this man is even a doctor. Story 21. I met who I thought was a great guy online, and after texting for 2 weeks, we finally met in person. He picked me up and we had an awesome time, so we decided to go back to his place. This is where things got weird. As we were nearing his place, there was almost no one else on the road, and then, out of nowhere, this other car cuts us off. Apparently, everyone knew each other and had some major beef. He threw his car in park, broke out a tire iron from the back seat, and suddenly there were 3 guys fighting. Fists were flying, people were bleeding. I still have no idea what was going on. We went back to his house, and he immediately wakes up his parents. It's like 3 a.m., and I'm now meeting his whole family. Cops show up but don't arrest him. They tell him he needs to come to the station with his parents. They all have a discussion, and his dad agrees to drive him to the police station after swinging through my date's methadone clinic first. Then, his dad drops him off at the police department and drives me home. It was a very awkward car ride with my date's father, whom I just met. A good time was had by all. Story 22. As a bartender, you see a lot of bad dates. The most recent one I witnessed involved a military guy who made sure to mention that he was in the military. He spent the whole time talking about his previous marriage, which was just cringy. Later, in a quiet bar with only 5 people, he started going on about all the dates he goes on, with his buddies hyping him up. I heard him constantly interrupting his date and turning the conversation back on himself. I don't know what happened, but I closed them out on 2 separate tabs. They were both bad tippers, so maybe they deserved each other. Story 23. He asked me if he could kiss me 30 minutes into the date. I brushed it off, but then he proceeded to tell me he hadn't masturbated since last Easter, and that he had to masturbate for 3 hours before bed, which was affecting his performance at work. Then he apologized and said, "Sorry, I'm not usually so forward. You're just so pretty." And then he added, "You really don't have a big nose for a Jew." I decided to get up and leave ASAP, telling the bartender not to bring him his check for 10 minutes, so he couldn't follow me out. Story 24. First red flag, he made me split a $15 check. Second red flag, he insisted I follow him to his house after the bar. Final red flag, he stole the $20 tip I left for the bartender out of the checkbook and pocketed it. Absolutely disgusting. Edit. This happened like 7 years ago. We drank about $70 worth of drinks. The bartender knew my face from the many times I'd been there. I believe he could have paid the $15, and I left the tip. That's my opinion. I respect everyone's opinion, and that's why everyone has someone for them. Story 25. 2 first and last dates come to mind. First, I meet a guy for a beer, and he asks for my number. I said, "You have it. We've been messaging." He replied, "Oh, that number," and I excused myself to the restroom, paid, tipped for my beer on the way, and slipped out, blocking him on my phone. Second, a lunch date. He's 20 minutes late to a not fancy place. He comes in wearing jeans with 2 giant holes in the knees, not the kind you pay extra for, plus a greasy polo shirt. As we're getting ready to order, he quickly says he's only paying for his own lunch. It was the tone like he thought every woman was out to get him. I always offered a split, but wow. I ordered a small appetizer to go and told him I had a client meeting that I had to hurry to get to because he was so late. Story 26. For our first date, he was taking me skiing. He pressured me the whole way, saying I was going to go down Black Diamonds with him, which scared me since I'd never skied or snowboarded before. On the way up, we hit some ice and he overcorrected, causing us to go off the side of a cliff and get caught in some thick brush. I was suspended in the air by my seatbelt. We carefully climbed out of the vehicle, and a nice elderly couple called a tow truck for us and took us to their place for milk and cookies while we waited. They scolded him for driving too fast and told us that people die there every year. We didn't go skiing, much to my relief. Then he took me to McDonald's for dinner, which was the last straw. He almost killed us and didn't even think to at least take us to a sit-down dinner. That was the defining moment I decided I would never go on a date with him again. He asked, and I kindly declined. He understood, I guess, because he never tried to talk to me again. Story 27. I told the guy beforehand that I'd just had ankle surgery and couldn't walk too much. He proceeded to insist we walk all over an outdoor mall. I fell twice because my ankle gave out and he didn't even stop to help me. Then he wanted me to suck his dick in his beat-up truck. I only did it because I didn't want to get hurt. I've never been on a date that made me so angry. I just wanted it to be over as fast as possible. Tip for a first date: never let the other person pick you up. Always have your own transportation, even if it means using your own 2 feet, or however many feet you happen to have. Story 28. I met this very attractive woman at a Halloween party. She was dressed as Wonder Woman. This was about 30 years ago, long before comic movies took over everything. She had an incredible body, was super nice, and seemed like a lot of fun. I suggested we get dinner sometime, and she was really into the idea. I couldn't believe my luck. I asked a couple of friends what her deal was, and got the "she's just like that" kind of feedback. Okay, whatever. We went out to eat, then hit a bar, but she didn't have anything to drink. We were still having a great time, and she asked if I wanted to come to her house. Yes, please. We drove out to this house attached to an old motel that her parents owned. It was a neat, though remote, spot. I figured I was in like Flynn. Then she stops me on the porch before opening the door, smiles, looks up at me, and I'm about to go in for the kiss when she says, "This is where I first saw him." I was confused and said, "Him?" She replied, "Yes, this is where I first saw Jesus." I actually laughed, thinking she was joking, but she got deadly serious and said, "You should come in and see for yourself." In an instant, I went from thinking I was about to make out with a very hot chick to leaving skid marks in the driveway.